open that page, I'll search for my fix, find what I need in the deep dark abyss.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of AI Skeptics. This week, we're really excited to have a mathematician join us, Daniel Litt. He's going to introduce himself in a second, but it's really exciting to talk to you about AI and mathematics in a less than expected skeptical way, I think, today. We'll see. Daniel, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. I'm Daniel Litt. I'm a professor at the University of Toronto. I work mostly in algebraic geometry and number theory. And I guess the relevance for this conversation is that I've been experimenting with AI, like trying to get it to do math since maybe 2022 or so about 4 years.
I didn't know you had such extensive practice with AI.
Yeah, so the original way I got into it is when GPT-3 was announced, you couldn't use it originally. Like it wasn't publicly available. The only way you could use it was through a video game called AI Dungeon, which was it would get kind of GPT-3 to be a dungeon master and walk you through a Dungeons and Dragons game. So I was curious about it, and I bought a subscription to AI Dungeon, and inside of the D&D game, I would try to get it to do math. So I would be create my character as a math professor and go into my office and then take out a calculator and add 8 plus 2. And it must have been prompted or something not to do math because it was quite bad at it. And so it'd always be the calculator broke and didn't output anything. So that was kind of my original experience with AI for math.
I like the idea that you're look, just for the sake of science, I'm going to play D&D. It's just for science. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, the first section today, we want to set up the context for the real reason you are here today. And it's about Erdos, and it's about mathematics and the culture of mathematics. I, of course, was a mathematician myself. In fact, my parents were both mathematicians.
Oh, I didn't know that.
And I'm going to introduce this notion of the great man of mathematics, Erdos. He was actually a pretty frequent visitor to my parents and my home when I was a baby.
Oh, wow.
And my father wrote a paper with him. And my father was a combinatorialist. He was the student of Jean-Paul Rota at MIT. Actually, he was at Rockefeller when my father was working with him. Anyway, so Rota would come by, and he would, first of all, he was addicted to speed, and somehow my father became his supplier for speed. I'm allowed to say this. Everybody's dead, so I can say all this stuff. He also was not particularly adored by my mom. She was also a mathematician. She was in fact working full time as a professor. But he would be "Oh, my button fell off. You're a woman." He was famously misogynistic and just assumed that women were there to feed and clothe him. And then I eventually met him when I was at the Budapest semesters in mathematics, and he didn't know I spoke any Hungarian, and I heard him say something because it was me and my friend Aaron, and then he was "Oh, there's a mathematician here and also a girl." And I was okay, this guy, am I right? But he was pretty amazing too. I just want to point out that behind every mythological male figure, there's always a story about women somewhere,
Sure.
But he was also mythological male figure. I'm going to let you say the good stuff about Erdos, Daniel.
Well, I remember he had a nickname he called children epsilons, and I remember he had a bunch of other names for various categories of people. Do you remember any of the other of these? I
do
think
remember the epsilon thing.
Yeah. I think there was a nickname for women too, which I can't pull to mind.
Yeah, I don't even want to think about it.
I read some bio of him and was remember kind of scratching my chin.
And I also want to give him a little bit of
times.
slack because his mom was nuts.
Uh-huh.
Nuts. I mean, nuts. We won't even go there.
I've learned a tiny bit about Erdos besides your stories, Kathy, from the book The Man Who Loved Only Numbers about him, which talks about some of his, how he was crazy proficient, obviously in many areas, particularly math, but just had these incredible gaps. I think couldn't tie his shoes is one of the things in that book.
For girls,
caught pneumonia because he was sleeping next to a window that was cracked open and he couldn't close it himself without help. So things where it's like, it actually reminded me a little bit of AI in a way where you're like, wow, Zoom, great at some things, not great at all at other things. Interesting guy, I guess. Do you
But I
each
mean,
have
he
an
was
Erdos number?
prolific.
Are our guests familiar, or our listeners familiar with the idea
Oh
of
yeah,
an
the
Erdos
Erdos
number?
number, right?
He's such a
I was about
boss in math that people characterize their own mathematical careers with reference to him. So will you guys talk about Erdos numbers?
Yeah, well, my
And I
dad
guess
had
it's
an
just-
Erdos number of 1 because he wrote a paper with Erdos, and like I had an Erdos number of 3 because I wrote a paper with somebody who wrote a paper with somebody who wrote a paper with Erdos. You know, like it's that's how it works. Daniel, do you know your Erdos number?
I think I have an Erdos number of 3 or 4. But yeah, I mean, at some point, you know, now that he's no longer writing papers, it starts to correlate more with like what career stage you're at and, you know,
Good
even
point.
how mathematically close you are to Erdos.
Right. And he was pretty strictly a combinatorialist and number theorist, right? He wasn't an algebraic geometer like yourself, Daniel.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah, I guess I do some number 3 too, but I have a very different flavor from Erdos. But you know, he was so prolific that I think probably most active mathematicians have some Erdos number, I would think.
And I mean, I think I really did want to draw a picture a little bit of mathematics as a culture, you know, like the fact that he was beloved in the community because of his idea generation and like his generosity of time with, you know, he was a traveler. He would stay at people's houses, do math with them, then go off to the next house. I don't think he owned a house. And he just spread math everywhere he went. And it was pretty incredible.
Yeah, I mean, I have some sense that like mathematics as a profession has kind of like professionalized in the last, 50 years or something. And maybe there's now fewer people like Erdos like that. And I don't know, I think that's like in general a positive thing, but maybe we lost some kind of weird characters by doing that.
We definitely have. But what do you mean by professionalized?
Just I think this like it's this kind of universities have become more corporate. There's a little bit more bureaucracy. Like I think it's harder to hire someone like Erdos. I think my sense is it was probably already very hard to hire Erdos when he was active. But it's I think presumably if Erdos went around these days doing the kinds of things that you outlined, like he would actually face some professional consequences, and arguably he should have. Right. That's the kind of thing. I mean,
I don't have a lot of memory of him like actually teaching classes or anything. I feel like he was mostly a visitor to departments and stuff. But yeah, I think you're right. But I mean, having said that, like the spirit of mathematics, as let's just compare it, for example, to lab science, which is a very, very different endeavor, right? Like lab science, like if you're a graduate student in a lab science field, you should be expecting to like work like a underling for your professor's lab for years. And then someday maybe you would get a lab if you play all your cards right and know how to write grant proposals and blah, blah, blah. It's like extremely complex social dynamics with huge groups of people doing stuff together. And that's the nature of the work. Mathematics isn't like that. And it still isn't like that, right? Would you agree?
Yeah, I think certainly like when I advise a graduate student, like they're basically doing their own work and I'm like maybe giving a little advice on taste or if they get stuck, like trying to get them unstuck or something, but everyone's kind of doing their own thing and it's so much more like individualized like research atmosphere than I think a lot of the other sciences.
Do you think that has to do with the equipment required? Like this story is coming to mind from my analysis professor in undergrad, Pat Gallagher, who was, maybe Erdos number 1. And he would say, I would be going to a conference flying and I get on the plane and Erdos is somewhere on the plane and he saw me come in and he will come take the seat next to me, displacing whatever traveler was like actually meant to be in that seat and would just sit down and without saying hello or anything would just say, okay, Patrick, P is a prime, not 2, and just start with a problem they had discussed years ago. So it's just like, you don't need anything. You need to sit down with another mathematician, maybe a piece of paper, and just start talking. All the equipment is right there.
Yeah.
I wonder if that
for
is,
some
plays into
mathematics
the community of math.
Yeah, and I would add, okay, so I guess you took a different thing from it, Daniel, and I'm not disagreeing with you. It might be more individualistic, although we're talking about collaborations. Like all of Erdős's work was collaborations. I don't think he wrote papers. He basically helped people come up with ideas. He often played a part in the proof, but they often proved most of it themselves, and then they wrote it up, but gave him credit, the co-authorship credit. I'm really talking about the generosity of mathematicians. Yes, most people write papers by themselves or with a few other people or as a combination of those two things. But in particular, graduate students are not the slaves of their professors, right? I'm sorry to say, Daniel, it's kind of the opposite, right? You said you're going to have a student defend a thesis today. And I'm sure that's like a culmination of a lot of work on your part. Not that you wrote their thesis at all, but that you helped them for the last 5 years without getting any papers out of it.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, I should say, I think the culture of you're right that it's kind of uncommon, for example, for a PhD supervisor to write a paper with their graduate student. My sense is that differs a little bit from place to place. Like it seems like it's a little more common in Europe, maybe. But yeah, I think at least in American math academia, that's basically right. Like you kind of advise a student and that's part of your job, and you don't get any immediate benefit except for like a warm glow in your heart.
All right,
so we're going to move to the second topic and explain why we're talking about Erdos and we're talking with Daniel on the AI Skeptics podcast. It's because AI has been doing some math that was teed up by Erdos, and Daniel was involved to some extent in this. There's a Scientific American article, which we'll put in the comments or the caption to this episode, that talks about a famous Erdos problem that ChatGPT helped to solve. And then Daniel took a look at it and at ChatGPT's work and has commented on it. So that's what we'll talk about now. Can you tell us a little bit about this problem that ChatGPT helped solve?
Sure. Yeah. So the question was the following. So you put n points in the plane and you want to arrange them so that as many pairs as possible are exactly a distance 1 apart. And so Erdos found a construction that was pretty good. So maybe your first guess as to a construction would be you put a grid of points in the plane of, where the grid length was 1. And that would give you, on the order of n pairs, up to some constant, which are your distance 1 apart if you put n points in the plane. So Erdos realized that you could do a bit better just by rescaling the grid. And so he put some kind of sequence of rescaled grids. If you do this, you get about n to the 1 plus some constant over log n pairs, which are unit distance apart. So all that means is that you get do a little bit better than the grid. And then he conjectured that was the best possible. So that's some lower bound, which he conjectured was also an upper bound asymptotically. The best proven upper bound was n to the 4/3. So what happened recently was an internal model at OpenAI disproved Erdős's conjecture. So it found a new construction of n tuples of points in the plane where, n to some fixed constant of them, which is bigger than 1, are unit distance apart. The original proof gave some very small improvements, so some constants that's just very slightly bigger than 1. We now know it's about 1.03 or so, or n to the 1.03 pairs of the unit distance apart. So one comment I want to make is you commented that it solved the unit distance problem, and that's not really true. So what it did is it disproved Erdős's conjecture, but there's still a huge gap between the new lower bound we have, so n to the 1.03 or so, and the best upper bound, which is n to the 4/3. And my sense is that actually most previous effort went into trying to improve that upper bound, and that's maybe still going to be what's happening. So there's somehow still a lot left to do on this question. Though maybe I should also say, this is kind of far from this problem is kind of far from my expertise. I was asked to check the proof because there was some kind of involved algebraic number theory involved, which is a bit closer to me. But I'm not an expert on the history of the unit distance problem, for example.
I love how you just dove straight into the actual best known lower and upper bounds here. That's super nerdy of you. One of the things, I didn't even read the Scientific American article. I just looked at the paper itself. So we will also link to that. Could you talk about what was actually given to what large language model and like what happened? Like how many efforts did it take before this counterexample was furbished by which large? Is it? Yeah, go ahead.
Yes.
Say a little bit more
So
about how it worked.
not all of this information is public. I can tell you what we do know. So
Okay.
right. So what happened was this was produced by an internal model at OpenAI. So it's not something publicly available. It's probably some version of what will be GPT 5.6 when that comes out, but we don't really know. What seems likely is that they were giving it thousands and thousands of problems, among which was this one. So in particular, there's like a list of Erdos problems on a website called erdosproblems.com, maintained by the amazing mathematician Thomas Bloom. And I imagine they gave all of those to their internal model. And then they had a grader, which is also an LLM, reading the solutions, and then the grader flagged this solution as being correct. And there are a bunch of like quite serious mathematicians working at OpenAI, including people who work in this general area of, combinatorial geometry, combinatorics, broadly speaking. And they were like, no way. Like, there's no way it solved the unit distance problem. This is like a central problem in combinatorial geometry. But they read the proof, and like to the extent that they were able to check it, it seemed to be correct. And then there was some ingredient using something called class field towers, which is coming from algebraic number theory, where they didn't have the expertise to check it. And so they asked, I'm friendly with some of these people, so they asked me and another mathematician, Victor Wang, to take a look at this part of the argument to check it. So I think I was one of the first people outside of OpenAI to see the proof. And, to be honest, like class field towers they're part of algebraic number theory. It's a little bit specialized, but this really is math from the 60s. It's stuff we understand very well. It was very easy to check, and it was pretty clearly correct. And so after that, sort of people became confident that the argument was right. And then Victor and I and a number of other mathematicians were kind of invited to like comment on the proof and kind of digest. One sort of funny aspect of this is that, the best available models and also internal models seem to be much worse at writing math than they are at doing math. So it's even if there's a sort of more or less autonomous proof of an interesting open question, it's still very useful to have humans kind of digest it and write it in like a coherent and understandable way. And so that was one reason that I was involved in this kind of remarks companion paper.
Let's save that to the third topic, because that's a really fascinating notion of like even just digging down into what constitutes a proof in the first place. But just in terms of the process, I just want to back up here and just mention, I'm glad you explained that this was not the only problem that this ChatGPT version was asked to solve. And it might not have been the only way of asking this particular question. Do you know anything about that? Do you know how many ways this was asked?
Right. So, we've seen the prompt. The prompt was basically just a statement of the problem and solve this. So I think we can be confident it was pretty fully autonomous. We also know it can't have been too expensive. So we've seen a summarized chain of thought, which is about 125 pages. So probably the truth chain of thought was some constant multiple of that, maybe 1,000 pages or something like that. So what you can estimate the cost of that individual run was probably well under $1,000, probably on the order of $100, I would guess. Okay. And we also know that they attempted this question like something like 100 times, because they made a graph of how often it succeeded at different levels of compute. And so for low compute, it would succeed. It would have come up with a proof like 10% of the time. And then as one let it think for longer and longer, it would get up to like a 60% success rate. And so if you're running the same problem 100 times or 1,000 times, that also gives you some kind of upper bound on the cost.
Do you think it was going back and forth with that grader that you mentioned? Like, is it getting feedback after the various
that's a good question. So I think we don't know exactly what kind of scaffolding it had. Presumably it had access to some kind of tools, but yeah, that's a little less clear. But I think
we also presumably don't know if it was fine-tuned. It must have been fine-tuned on mathematical proofs.
So what they've claimed is that that's not the case, that it's just a general purpose reasoning model with no fine-tuning. I to be honest, I believe that. I think that the improvement, like the improvements on model capabilities in the last year or so have been really remarkable. Like having looked at the proof, it doesn't seem to me to be much like post hoc, much beyond what you can get just from the best publicly available models, I mean, of course they do some reinforcement learning on mathematical reasoning, but it doesn't seem like this was like a specially designed model aimed for this kind of problem. Yeah. But of course I'm speculating to some extent here.
There's one other thing
do you have any estimate of how many open Erdos problems there are? I mean, just focusing on Erdos himself.
Sure. So ErdosProblems.com has around 1,200, something like between 1,200 and 1,300 problems on it. I think a bit more than half of them have been solved. So there's on the order of 500 open ones.
I mean, if you think about 100 runs of 500 problems, $1,000 each, that the money adds up after a while.
Yeah. So probably they're not doing each of the problems 100 times, I would guess. Probably just once they wanted to make that graph. So probably they just did it on one. But yeah, I would guess that it's conceivable they spend $1 billion on this whole activity, not counting training. That's a lot of money. If you compare it to like the marginal cost of producing high quality math research, it's maybe not that much, right? Like I would estimate the cost of producing like the best paper each year is like the marginal cost is like $100,000 or something. Like if you just think of like what this like salaries of mathematicians are. So it seems roughly comparable. I mean, of course, like the kinds of results the models are proving are like quite different from like the best results you see each year. So it's right now the models are getting very good at like some relatively small proportion of mathematical activities.
Okay, well,
this whole
that's a perfect
conversation,
segue.
It's making me think about monkeys at typewriters, publication bias kind of thing. Like, they try 10,000 problems and then it gets one right. But then it occurred to me, like, you could view the actual area of math research in a similar way if you wanted to. Like, there are a lot of mathematicians spending a lot of time and not getting an astounding result. Like, are they monkeys at typewriters?
Of course. I mean, I do think like it's worth thinking there's like a very different way to use AI productively than from how humans do mathematics productively. Like the way I do math is like I think about 2 or 3 problems and I like try to really deeply understand them. And then like historically, like that actually works. Like sometimes I get somewhere. Mm-hmm. Whereas like I think the productive way to use the tools right now, at least, is like throw 1,000 problems at them and see what, in some relatively small proportion of cases, you get a nice result out. But because it's relatively cheap to throw a problem at them, that's like something you can do productively, and pick some low-hanging fruit that way. So they seem to be kind of complementary approaches right now.
That's a perfect transition to the third topic, which is what is the future of math with AI as a participant?
Yeah, and I'll just start by asking, like, going off the point that you were making earlier, what is AI good at? What kind of math and what kind of mathematical progress do you expect to see coming from AI and either this approach or a different approach that you're thinking about?
Yeah, that's a good question. So right now, I think the models are at the point where like if you have some sort of relatively well understood technique, they can probably apply it pretty reliably. If a problem can be solved by kind of putting together puzzle pieces in the literature, you have a good chance. Like my general rule of thumb is like, if there is someone or maybe 2 people for which some problem is like relatively easy, probably they can do it. And to be clear, like this could be a person who like has never heard of the problem that you're like trying to approach. So for example, with this unit distance thing, I think there are like a lot of algebraic number theorists who are like pretty comfortable with this idea of class field towers, which were used in the solution. Probably the vast majority of them had not spent any time thinking of the unit distance problem. Okay, so this is like super useful. It's like actually not that small a portion of the historical activity of math research, like putting things together or applying known techniques. There are definitely like a lot of people who have had very good careers, like because of their computational fortitude or ability to apply known techniques, maybe in creative ways, or maybe just like because they were, really good calculators. I know 150 years ago, a lot of the activity of mathematics was like making tables of integrals and that kind of thing. And obviously that's changed.
Or just doing huge amounts of formulas.
Right, exactly. Yeah. And
Yeah.
I think there's like, we're definitely going to see some change to what mathematicians are doing. Like, even if the capability levels of the models were held constant, like there's certain things that previously would have required a human expert, that now no longer do. I think, if you think about where things are trending in the short term, it seems like the models are getting very good at providing proofs of like well-stated lemmas, for example. So, for example, there's this nice project, First Proof, developed by Mohammed Abu Zaid and Lauren Williams and a number of other mathematicians, where they kind of take lemmas from papers in progress and try to get AI models to provide proofs. And in the first 2 rounds, it seems like maybe half the time or something, the best models are able to do this, and presumably that number's going up.
So, like, to back up, just to concretely apply what you've just said to the Erdos problem, it found a counterexample to the Erdos conjecture, and it used standard techniques to do so. Is that correct?
I would say it used well-known ideas, but it definitely applied them in a way that had never been applied before. So, like, I definitely don't want to like give the sense that like these things can't have new ideas, or like that what was done wasn't technically impressive. I think it was like actually very impressive. And like, if, a year ago, if a human had done this, the paper would have been published in one of the best journals. Like, that person would have probably get a good job. And it's a real accomplishment. What is true is that, it's a kind of, the argument is kind of combinatorial matching, like taking an idea from one thing and applying it to something else. Which is like a lot. I mean, a lot of math papers have that form, but like that's definitely not the only activity that mathematicians do. Like, I think there are, there's a lot of mathematical work that involves like inventing new objects, or like studying an object that's never been studied before.
Exactly what I was going to ask next. Like, what is AI not good at?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think, for me, the rule of thumb is like, if there's a output which can be relatively easily checked, like a number or a proof or something like that, there's a good chance AI is going to be good at it. And I think like that's the trend, is that like in the near term, AI will probably get extremely good at all of those things. And then there's sort of more fuzzy mathematical activities. Like, I want to understand, I don't know, the generations of a model. Like, I just want to understand some object, or I've invented some new object and I want to play with it and see what it's like. And where maybe the hard part is like finding the statement of a lemma or something like that. And there the models seem to be much weaker. I think there's some like weak evidence that they're improving at this kind of thing too. But, definitely, what's maybe not so obvious to your listeners is that like a lot of mathematical research has this sort of vague, like, I'm doing natural sciences 500 years ago and feeling around in a dark room. I don't really know what I'm even trying to understand. And there, a lot of that honestly is like just happening in your brain in some way that I don't think we fully understand. And it's, at least I haven't figured out how to get AI tools to be useful for this kind of thing.
Yeah, it occurs to me, like, when you think about how an AI learns is through statements of theorems and statements of lemmas and their proofs, right? That is the training data, if you will. One of the things that mathematicians don't write down in their papers is the absolutely enormous amount of time they spent trying to figure out what they care about, what they think might be true, which objects that they are actually going to settle on to talk about the truth that they're trying to get at. So that's untrained. That's not training data, right? Those sort of question marks are not there in the training data. But on the other hand, I understand that there are efforts being made to have AI come up with new results. Yeah. Is that true?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, right. So you're right. Like, historically, like, base models have been trained like basically on what we've been written. And then there's some post-training that happens after that, which I think, again, a lot of it has been like, maybe they'll synthetically generate a bunch of like a problem set for the model, and then the model will solve the problem set. So it's still kind of lemmas or theorem statements and proofs. But yeah, I mean, I think that the labs are like, I mean, again, I'm speculating, but it seems likely they're trying to develop all sorts of reinforcement learning environments that would also try to train other mathematical, like, capabilities that are useful for doing mathematics. I mean, the other thing I maybe you can tell I've been trying to re-examine what what skills are relevant for human mathematics in light of some of these developments. And I think one possibility is like humans are not very good at certain things like long calculations or working out 1,000 cases or something like that. And so like we do things like develop theory or like try to understand an object or something as a way of like encapsulating some big search we have to do and like trying to do it in an educated way. But like you might actually be able to substitute for that capability if you're just very strong, like with calculation or willing to grind through 1,000 cases or something like that. So I think it's possible actually that we see models like never develop or like not in the near term develop some of the skills we think are really important for math, but like nonetheless get really good at math just by substituting other skills for the things we kind of believe to be important.
To pick up on the like willing to grind through calculations, something that stood out to me from the Scientific American write-up was mathematician, and I forget who was commenting on it, saying, what was impressive was that the large language model was willing to explore this area that seemed like it might not be fruitful. And it was also not exposed, I guess, to the dogma that a lot of mathematicians thought Erdos was right. If he thought, okay, they weren't looking for a counterexample. They were looking for a proof of his conjecture. And it was almost like this comment was saying, well, the LLM was willing to spend or potentially waste time and effort in thinking against the grain in an area that might not be interesting to most mathematicians. And so it's this idea of like finding the places where the math community maybe has neglected or has crystallized around one viewpoint. And then there's other viewpoints that maybe offer a unique avenue into that problem. And if you can prompt it 1,000 times to try 1,000 different ways in the areas that human mathematicians find boring, like maybe that's or that they just like think is wrong. Maybe that's a place for it to just spin its wheels and come up with a bunch of candidate solutions.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's right. Right. So maybe one comment is that like, even for the best known problems, like in this case, this unit distance conjecture was pretty well known. There's very few people working on them. Like, there's just not that many mathematicians. Like, I don't know how many people are working on the Riemann hypothesis right now. That's like maybe the most famous open problem in mathematics, but it's probably not that many, right? Like, I think even, most people like to kind of just feel like they don't have any ideas to approach it. And so I think like basically every open question is kind of attention bottlenecked. And so just having like kind of some semi-expert entity, like in this case, the AI, that has a surplus of attention is very useful. Like, I think we should expect it to resolve a lot of problems because of this. But I do want to maybe push back slightly against something that you said. So I agree that in this particular case, like probably a big factor here was like not like, people kind of generally believed the conjecture was true. And so maybe not that much effort had been put into it. And so I think we should expect a bunch of successes along these lines, like things that were arguably in some way attention bottlenecked. Although I think this unit distance problem had like a lot of attention put on it compared to most conjectures. But like also if you think capabilities are increasing, like the first successes are going to look like this, but there's still a leading indicator that we should see kind of, maybe arguably more substantial, more creative results in the future.
I mean, that's the perfect, I know we're almost out of time, but I absolutely need to ask this question, for me, the most important one, which is even if AI got really good at it, really good at proofs, and we had a checker that was capable of confirming a proof. Imagine like 100 years hence those things are really good.
Yeah.
I can imagine that, but it's not what I want to do. I don't want to be like sitting around waiting for the computer to tell me what's true, right? That's not why I became a mathematician. Presumably that's not why you became a mathematician. Like, it's like, don't you want to?
I don't know if this is on video. I kind of made a kind of non-committal
it is
gesture.
on video, yeah. But like, yes. Also, people listen to it on their commute. So you said
that might be why. Well, I'll let you finish the question. And
well, I guess. I mean, listen. I'm saying that, like, for that matter, just to be extreme about it, like, there's no real reason for it to answer it in English. If there's a checker that's going to check it, it could just be in some kind of computer language, and we could just be informed we could wake up and the overnight batch has come up with 16 new theorems, and we could just scan the list of theorems and be like, okay, that's done. I guess I get to go teach people instead of teaching them class field theory, which I taught, at MIT when I was a postdoc. I will go teach them how to get AI to solve math problems faster. Yeah, like you'll be a prompt engineer. I feel like, what the hell? I mean, isn't math art? Isn't it an artistic endeavor, or is it an engineering job?
Okay, so I think that so some people get into math because it's like fun, like the activity of mathematics is fun, right? And I think the activity of mathematics, like if capabilities keep improving, which I expect they will, is definitely going to change. So some of the people who got into math because like the activities, they enjoyed the activities that it constituted, will probably no longer find it fun. Maybe other people will find it more fun. For me, I actually don't feel like I got into math because I find it fun. I got into math, I feel like, because there is an activity I do enjoy, but it's more like I kind of start learning something or start running across some object and I don't understand it, and I really dislike that feeling and I want to understand it and I want to know the answer. But
do you want to understand it or do you want to know the answer, Daniel? That's my point.
Both.
Because this is not going to give us the satisfaction of understanding it.
No, I disagree. It's not going to give us the aha feeling. I loved being an undergrad. I loved learning math that other people had already worked out. And in fact, the experience of doing that, I think, is like pretty similar, at least for me, to the experience of doing research. Like you can't understand anything anyone is saying in math, right? Like you get the textbook and it's like totally impenetrable, and like you can't understand it until you work through it yourself. So like even in this world where like, a lot of research is just being sort of provided to us by an AI, like you still have to work to understand it. Like maybe there's some question of whether people are motivated to do that. Yeah. Like I think I would be. Yeah. But
in fact, you're painting a picture that's even more horrible to me, which is that, and we're like, we never let these things go this long, but I can't stop. Like a more horrible thing is you're going to wake up in the morning, you're going to find out the answer to your favorite question mathematically. But then you're going to struggle or maybe never actually understand what the fuck the proof is supposed to be. And so you'll just be like, well, I know it's true, but I don't understand the proof.
But that's like the same experience I have now. Like
no, it's not, because now you really don't know whether it's true.
No, I do. I mean, I think there's a lot like the Riemann hypothesis is true. I think we have like so much evidence for this. Like,
no, I don't believe it till I see it.
All right. I'm describing my belief. I believe the Riemann hypothesis is true. I think there's a lot of very strong evidence for it. I think it's as strong as evidence for like any physical theory, basically. So I'm very confident it's true. There's a lot of, maybe my favorite conjecture is the Grothendieck-Katsky curvature conjecture. I think there's a lot of evidence it's true. And like, all I do is like struggle to see why, struggle to understand why. That's like the whole job. And like, if I had, a hint, that would be like amazing. But that's something like, okay, we're imagining this world where like, not only is AI like, more capable than all human mathematicians in like all aspects of research mathematics, which I think is like not super close, although I think it's like plausible it will happen, like maybe in my lifetime, say. But we're also imagining a world where it like can answer any question you have. And that I think is not plausible. Like there are kind of good computational
reasons. So like an incompleteness theorem of AI mathematical ability.
Yeah, I don't really mean incompleteness. I just mean like it's pretty easy to
Daniel,
come up
we
with
actually must stop. We must stop. But let me just say, I bet you that in the next 5 years, just take a quick bet that the next 5 years, you would be able to get AI to come up with like the proof of Fermat's last theorem without using any of the ideas of Taylor or Wiles.
Yeah.
Just basic information that was only known in the 1800s. So in other words, pushing new old techniques to their max. It's like, in other words, I feel like there's a certain number of moves that we have as mathematicians, and it's like, it's amazing what we can do with those moves. It's like a Rubik's Cube. There's just not that many moves.
Right.
And we think of it as they've encapsulated a new idea and they've come up with new objects. But I bet you they're just actually translatable into old moves. And that's my theorem. That's my conjecture.
Okay.
And I think that somebody's going to prove that. And so we're just going to be like, oh, the Riemann hypothesis, like if it's provable, then we're done. AI.
See. I don't know. Okay. Well, I expect that I'm pretty skeptical that the Riemann hypothesis will be proven in the next 5 years. Like, it could happen.
Okay.
But I expect that if it happens, and let's say it was done by an AI, it will be kind of satisfying. Like, we'll learn a lot from the proof, and it won't just be
if we can understand it. Yeah.
I expect we'll be able to understand it, and we'll learn a lot from the proof.
Okay, we'll see. Thank you, Daniel. Thank you so much for joining.
Thank you so much.
Sorry for going over.
No, it was a lot of fun.
Everyone, thank you for sitting in your car after you're arriving at work. And see you guys next time on AI Skeptics.